Hello, my dear friends. You're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 15th of March of 2026. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. These days, it's becoming very dangerous to stay in the international waters because we see that many countries, many states are trying to use the international waters as their own waters. And the most important, many countries are trying to use the international waters in their favor with the purpose to reduce the economical capabilities of opponents or of enemies. We can see this situation in the area of the Middle East, in the Persian Gulf, in the area of the Strait of Hormuz. We can see something similar in the Red Sea. We can see something similar in the Mediterranean Sea, North Sea, and the Baltic Sea. It seems that we are returning back in the 17th or 18th century, centuries when there were pirates or something like this. It seems that we have, let's say, modern pirates as well, but this time pirates are not something unique, are not something like a small unit somewhere in the international waters that take under control this small or that small part of the waters. We are talking about the system, the pirate system on the state level, and this is a very dangerous situation. For example, during the previous weeks and since the beginning of this year, we received lots of updates of how different states of the European Union were arresting and capturing vessels and tankers of a possible shadow fleet of the Russian Federation. We will discuss this in a minute. We received updates, lots of updates from the area of the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. This territory was completely blocked by the Iranians without any chances to pass through this territory. Furthermore, we start receiving updates not about some complex situation in the area of the Persian Gulf, so to the west of the Strait of Hormuz. We start receiving lots of updates about the situation in the area of the Gulf of Oman. For example, here we can see a kilometer-long queue of tankers behind the Strait of Hormuz. Now, we discussed the situation during the previous video. For some reason, different states and different countries continue accumulation of their tankers right exactly in this area. As of the end of the 15th of March of 2026, nothing threatens to this queue, but we need to understand that if something happens, let's say if something happens like the landing operation, possible landing operation through these islands of the Persian Gulf, obviously this queue will become most likely something like a legal target for the Iranians, because obviously they will try to reduce the military capabilities of the coalition. But for some reason, different companies through the world continue accumulation of their tankers and vessels in this area, and this is a very dangerous situation. And it seems that the landing operation is imminent. For example, during the previous 24 hours, we started receiving updates and satellite pictures of ships, military ships of the United States of America, USS Tripoli and the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit heading towards the Middle East, which means that this unit most likely would be used for some landing operation purposes. Furthermore, the situation and something dangerous is brewing in the area of the Gulf of Aden or Strait of el-Mandeb. So as of now, we can see a strong convoy of oil tankers and commercial cargo ships passes through the southern Yemen. This is the Strait of el-Mandeb, and we need to understand that just a single strike or just a small Yemeni decision to close the Strait of el-Mandeb could send oil prices jumping $10-15 just in a day. When talking about weeks or months, the oil prices could reach $200 per barrel or even more. As of now, the situation is stable here, but it seems that the situation is stable in the area of the Strait of el-Mandeb not because the situation is stable, but it seems that the Yemenis have prepared something like a trap. The thing is that a bit further in the northwestern direction, we can find the US Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier group. And I would like to remind you that several days ago, more precisely 3 days ago, we received satellite pictures where we could see the real presence and the real place where this aircraft carrier group was recorded. And I would like to remind you that this aircraft carrier group crossed and entered Suez Canal a long time ago. This aircraft carrier group entered Suez Canal probably somewhere at the beginning of March of 2026, more precisely on the 7th of March. So the Chinese satellites recorded this aircraft carrier group entering the Suez Canal, so on the 7th of March. Today is the 15th of March of 2026, and we see that this aircraft carrier group is not running anywhere, is not in a hurry, and most likely is not going to enter the Gulf of Aden or the Arabian Sea with the purpose to reinforce the Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier group. And the reason of this is that most likely if this aircraft carrier group approaches the Strait of el-Mandeb, most likely the Houthis will attack this aircraft carrier group. So that is why this is a very dangerous situation. So we'll see that for military purposes and for military ships and vessels of the coalition, both straits are closed or blocked at least partially, the Strait of el-Mandeb and of course the Strait of Hormuz. And it seems that currently the coalition doesn't have capabilities to unblock both straits. But obviously this situation, these let's say operations are imminent, and most likely the United States of America sooner or later, and the coalition itself would be forced to start doing this. But as of now, we believe that the Iranians still have 2 or 3 weeks until the United States of America finishes the redeployment process, and only then everything starts. Another important thing is that the Western countries and the European countries intensify their pressure on the Russian shadow fleet. If you remember, we discussed that with the crisis in the Middle East, it doesn't mean that the golden age starts for the Russian Federation. Maybe this golden age will start in 2-3 months or something like this, but during this period of time, the Western countries, the European countries will try to increase the pressure on Russia with the purpose to force the Russians, to force the Iranians to give up. But everybody most likely understands, or maybe somebody doesn't understand this, that this will never happen. This is the main problem. And for example, if we increase the number of updates since the beginning of January, we will receive dozens of cases through the territory of, through the, let's say, international waters around the European Union, when the European countries were arresting the Russian fleet, the Russian ships and vessels. Several cases, up to 2 cases, took place between Finland and Estonia. For example, on the 4th of January of 2026, a video was published of how Finnish special forces were arresting the ship of a shadow fleet belonged probably to the Russian Federation. So this video was published, the vessel was arrested. Somewhere at the same period of time, there were reports that Estonian authorities detained the container ship bound for Russia. And this update was published on the 4th of February. So just in January, at the beginning of January, 1 case, at the beginning of February, the 2nd case. When talking about the territory further, let's say in the direction of Sweden, just during the previous 3 months, we received at least 2 or 3 cases of how the European countries were arresting or detaining ships that possibly belong to the shadow fleet of the Russian Federation. So one of the cases took place in the area of the state by the name of Sweden. Here we can see the special operation carried out by the Swedish special forces. Here we can see how they landed on this, let's say, vessel and arrested or detained. A few more cases took place on the 7th of March, almost the same situation. Sweden detained the bulk carrier Kafa. So as you can see, just within a week, at least 2 tankers were detained by the Sweden authorities. Another ship was detained or seized in the area of Denmark, and this time the sources reported that this ship had connections with the Iranians. Also, during the same period of time, several ships were seized in the area of Belgium, and we have a video where we can see this. And all these actions, all these events pushes the oil prices to grow. I told you that tomorrow most likely we will face something like the Black Monday. We believe that lots of things will happen tomorrow when talking about markets, financial markets through the world, and of course prices for oil. And everything that we've discussed took place, let's say, in the northern parts of the European Union. But during the same period of time, also lots of things happened in the area of the Mediterranean Sea. Several vessels and tankers were detained or arrested by the French special forces in the northwestern part of the Mediterranean Sea. I would like to remind you that just several weeks ago we had a report that somebody attacked the Russian tanker with gas with Navy drones, and this is the picture, this is the video of destroyed tanker, and later we received these pictures where we can see the consequences of attack. And this situation took place also in the beginning of March of 2026, so just several days ago. And of course, don't forget about the situation that is currently taking place in the Black Sea. Almost every single day we received another report how this or that tanker was attacked by somebody, by unknown third party. Just yesterday, 2 days ago, we received a report that drones reportedly attacked the Greek tanker Delta Harmony near Novorossiysk. So lots of updates are coming, and this situation will continue intensifying. And the question is, not the question is, but when talking about the situation with the Russian shadow fleet, all this happens because currently the Russians still haven't found a solution how to fight this, how to counter-fight these, let's say, attacks from the European countries. But obviously sooner or later this will happen. And when it happens, then we will understand how the things are going to develop. Let's return back to the Middle East. During the previous 24 hours, the coalition continue attacking the position and military objects and military forces of Iran through the entire territory of Iran, and lots of videos were published on this matter. And we believe that all these attacks and all this strike will continue until marine forces arrive in this area, which most likely will happen within the next 2 or 3 weeks. So that is why all these days the attacks will continue, but without significant changes, because we see that every single attack from the coalition side is being counterattacked from the Iranian side with almost the same number of missiles and the ballistic missiles. During the previous 24 hours, lots of explosions once again were recorded in the area of the US bases in the state of Kuwait. The explosions took place in the area of United Arab Emirates. We're talking about the city of Dubai. The financial center was attacked with a drone. Furthermore, the Iranians continue attacking the port infrastructure in the area of the city of Fujairah. So lots of reservists were attacked by the Iranians, and we can see the consequences of this attack. Once again, tomorrow we'll see the Black Monday most likely. Furthermore, we continue receiving updates about a critical situation around the US bases in the area of Baghdad and around US bases in the area of the city of Erbil, which is located in the northern parts of Iraq. So, but we see that this is also a very difficult situation for the coalition, because as for the situation in Iraq, we see that it's more like guerrilla forces fighting with the US bases in this area and with the assets connected with the US capital and the US and the coalition finance. So let's wait and see what is going to happen next, and most likely these upcoming nights another wave of attacks from both the Iranian and the coalition side we will see. Now let's return, let's move to the Ukrainian conflict. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of updates from this area, and the most important probably is that the Ukrainians launched a massive attack in the direction of the city of Moscow using hundreds of drones. These attacks started yesterday on the 14th of March of 2026, somewhere at 2 p.m. And the Russians are saying that during that attack, during the 14th of March, between 11 a.m. and 9 p.m., the Russians destroyed 280 drones of the armed forces of Ukraine. Overnight, the Russians destroyed additional 170 drones, which means that in total, just during the previous 24 hours, more precisely, between 11 a.m. and 7 a.m. of the 15th of March, the Russians destroyed 450 drones. Of course, most of them were decoys without a warhead, but we understand that the most important purpose of those attacks were to overload the Russian air defense forces and to force the Russians to waste missiles, expensive missiles against decoys. And today, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation provided us additional report. They're saying that between 8 a.m. and 2 p.m., the Russians destroyed additional 125 drones, and most of them were heading towards the city of Moscow. So, all in all, between the 14th and the 15th of March, according to information we have, the Russians destroyed around 600 drones that were flying in the direction of the capital of the Russian Federation, which means that it could mean that the Russian air defense forces are pretty exhausted right now, and this means that in coming hours the Ukrainians may attack the city of Moscow with additional drones and probably with missiles of Flamingo type, which can lead to unpredictable consequences. Another important thing is that today the Ukrainians stated that they're going to watch the negotiation process with the Russians the next several weeks, and then 2 weeks or something or so, and then Ukrainians will make a decision. They will decide whether to continue the negotiation process or to quit the negotiation process. So basically today the Ukrainians reported that most likely in 2 weeks negotiation process will be finished, will be closed, and the parties will answer in full strength the spring military campaign with different offensives through the front line. As for the current situation on the ground, it seems that the Russians have launched their Zaporizhzhia offensive operation, and during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly in the Orekhov direction. So this is the situation by the end of the 14th of March of 2026. This is the end of the 14th of March. The Russians improved their positions on their way towards the village of Gulai-Polska. We received lots of videos from this area of how Russians were attacking the settlement of Gulai-Polska with tools from thrower systems, and by the end of the 15th of March, the Russians, according to mainly pro-Russian sources, improved their positions significantly between the villages of Verkhnya Tersa and Gulai-Polska. The Russians captured several networks of fortifications. The Russians answered the southern parts of the settlement of Verkhnya Tersa. We're talking about these barracks and these hangars, and the Russians managed to approach the settlement of Gulai-Polska from the east, and currently the distance between possible Russian positions and the village itself is already less than 1.5 kilometers, which means that the battles for these key settlements will start in coming maybe even hours. So the Russians are moving in the direction of the city of Orekhov, in the direction of the Orekhov agglomeration from behind. The Ukrainians understand what exactly is going to happen next, so that is why they prepared themselves. They reinforced the main logistic roads in this area. Here we can see the protection nets that were established by the Ukrainians, and here we can see how a Russian drone avoided this net and attacked the vehicle of the armed forces of Ukraine that most likely was heading towards the Zaporizhzhia, eastern Zaporizhzhia direction. So the situation in this region is very complicated, but the most important thing is that the Russians launched their major Zaporizhzhia offensive operation, and as of the first phase of this offensive operation, the Russians would try to establish complete control over the city of Orekhov, over the Orekhov agglomeration, and basically to cut this pocket. So Russians will try to connect the settlements of Rizdvyanka and Novoyakovlevka, Stepnogorsk along this red line. So this is going to be the first stage of the Russian offensive operation, and most likely the Russians are planning to finish the battle for this pocket, obviously before most likely August or maybe even September of 2026. This will allow the Russians to have additional time, enough of time to improve their positions around the Sich of Zaporizhzhia before 2027 comes. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Dobropolye direction. The Russians are about to finish the battle for the settlement of Grishna. During the previous 24 hours, we received additional updates. We expect that in coming hours, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm complete control over the territory. But as of now, we just continue receiving updates of how Ukrainians were attacking the Russian forces on the territory of the village of Grishna itself. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Konstantinovka direction. Yesterday, the Russians launched their major offensive operation after this very heavy artillery preparation. In this video, we can see how the Russians were reducing to ruins the most western parts of the city, and right after this artillery preparation, the Russians began advancing. And during the previous night and during the previous 24 hours, the Russians improved their position significantly. The Russians are about to establish complete control over the settlement of Ilinka, which is a part of the western Konstantinovka agglomeration, and the Russians are about to establish control over the industrial zone in the southern part of the city, located along N20 and N32 roads. So the Ukrainians began sending more and more reinforcements and reserves in the southern parts of the city of Konstantinovka with the purpose to stabilize the situation. And during the previous 24 hours, lots of videos were recorded of how Ukrainians were redeploying additional forces in the southern direction using vehicles. So which means that Ukrainians are trying to reinforce the southern Konstantinovka with additional reinforcement. And here we can see how the Russians ambushed lots of vehicles and lots of reinforcements and reserves that was trying to answer the southern parts for the stabilization purposes. So we see that it seems that the first stage of the probably final major Konstantinovka battle ended in Russian favor. The Russians managed to break through Ukraine's defense along the city limits, and the Russians managed to ambush lots of reinforcements and reserves that were trying to answer the city of Konstantinovka for the stabilization purposes. Which means that most likely in coming days we will receive additional changes. As for the Slaviansk direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received almost anything. The Russians published lots of videos of how they were attacking the Liman citadel, which is located in the southern parts of the city. Here we can see how the Russians were attacking and destroying temporary deployment points of the armored forces of Ukraine in this part of the city of Liman, which means that the Russians most likely are not going to, let's say, answer the city of Liman itself until they finish the battle for the citadel. And until they finish the battle with the FPV drone operators' points. As for the northern directions, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. And that's it for today. The Military Summary channel reminds that we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye-bye.